Appraisals, and what can I do to help when meeting the appraiser at your listing? Receiving the initial call from the appraiser. Make certain that you have listed your name, email address, and cell phone number appropriately on the listing sheet so that the appraiser may contact you with minimal effort on his or her part. When you do receive the call, be very polite and courteous and try to accommodate the appraiser with a reasonable time frame to meet at the subject property. What to ask the appraiser on that initial call. I've selected some current listings and current comparables for the subject property. May I please share them with you at the inspection? Most appraisers will respond with a resounding sure. If they do not want any help, that is a sign that you may be in trouble with this particular deal. I would bring them anyways to the inspection and offer them again in person. Choosing the proper comparables. When you are choosing the comparables to utilize for the appraiser, remember they are not necessarily the ones you choose when you originally price out the subject property. If enough time has elapsed, you may have to choose new comparable closed properties and certainly new comparable listings. The all-important comparable solds should be within 12 months of today's date, within 1 mile of the subject property. That can vary depending on the type of property in the suburbs. It could be a bit over a mile. Things will vary. These are just not ironclad rules, but rules that generally apply. They should be the same style of property. In other words, expanded bungalows should be compared to expanded bungalows. A ranch should be compared to a ranch, and vice versa, and so on. I should say there should be a similar room count above grade. This is rooms not counting the basement. In the MLS they are allowed to count the basement rooms. Take those rooms out and have a similar room count. In other words, if it's a two-story colonial style home with 8 rooms, 4 bedroom, 2.5 bathrooms, and with a full basement, and may or may not have finished rooms in the basement. What's most important is the fact that it is an 8-room, 4-bedroom, 2.5 bath above grade, if you will. Choosing the proper comparables continued. Ages should be similar. Now, there's no, for example, I can't say that it's, they got to be within 20 years of each other or 10 years of each other. That is because, new construction could probably be compared to up to 1, 2, maybe even 3 years old, but no further than that. A 5 to 10 year old house, certainly, you don't want to compare to, a 16 or 17 year old house, so it does vary. But in general, for example, a house built in 1939 could probably be, certainly be compared to a house that was built in 1919. Okay, so it does vary depending on the age of the property. Should be in the same school district. Okay, this is highly important, especially in the suburbs, because the school district, there are many subdivisions that have different school districts built right across the street from one another, and they sell for, for example, there's one in Winstone in Barrington, and that subdivision, for example, could be $100,000 difference between the two schools. So that is highly important that you compare apples to apples when you're talking about a school district. Similar types of construction type. Here I'm speaking of, an all brick house, versus an all vinyl house, or, it's vinyl and brick, or, brick with a little vinyl. You want to try to compare, once again, apples to apples on that, but that is something that can be made an adjustment for. For example, when you're doing an appraisal, typically the brick ranch should be compared to other brick ranches and not necessarily the vinyl or aluminum ranch that's being compared to. But in the 2 stories, there's various types of construction, and you try to keep them as similar as you can. Okay. Lastly, similar updating. Okay. You don't want to compare, for example, let's take the the classic bungalow. And the bungalow was built in 1929 and really has minimal updating to the current, versus a house that was completely redone in 2015, 2016, let's say, and is all up to date with current to the current standards of granite countertops in the kitchen, stainless steel appliances, something like that. You definitely want to make sure by reading that listing, the listings, that they're very similar as per the updating. If the subject property is a condominium unit, all of the above criteria is similar, but in addition, look for the unit to be within the same building. That's ideal, if you're finding comparables within the same building and fit the other criteria, and or within the same complex. There are, many that, doesn't necessarily have to be right in that same building, but they build the same units in the complex. It could be 5 different buildings, but they have the same, 2-bedroom, 1-bath that exists in that one as does the others, and that would be perfectly within a good comparable if that be the case. Choosing the proper comparables continued. The comparable listings should fit all the same criteria as the comparable solds, but can be actual listings, under contract listings, or pending listings. These listings are also very important to the appraiser because they are required in any appraisal that is being done for loan purposes. The number of comparable properties to supply to the appraiser. An appraiser doing the appraisal for now under contract listing requires at a minimum 3 comparable sold properties and at a minimum 2 comparable active listings to complete the appraisal for loan purposes. That is a requirement currently, and that is what's going to be on the appraisal at a minimum. It's a good idea to supply more of each comparable, if available, to ensure that the appraiser gets a complete understanding of the marketplace you're trying to show that your listing sold in. 5 sold comparable properties and 3 active comparable properties would be ideal to supply the appraiser if possible. You can only supply, what's relevant. If that doesn't exist, do not put them in. Don't get comparables, from completely different areas simply to, bring 5 and 3 actives. 5 solds and 3 actives. That would not be appropriate if they don't really apply to the situation. The range or dollar amount of comparable properties. A perfect appraisal consists of 1 lower in value comparable property, 1 higher in value comparable property, and 1 pretty much straight on value comparable property. If there are more than 3 properties that support the market value of the subject property, they should also be utilized and indicated in your appraisal packet for the appraiser. In addition, do not fear giving out a lower than the sale price comparable property to the appraiser. They actually need this for the appraisal, and they will look at you, the broker, as more credible if you do so. By providing an appraiser with 5 quote unquote comparable properties that are all much higher in sale price than the subject property, that just means one of 2 things: that you're not a very good broker because you couldn't sell it as high as certainly all the comparables that you're trying to provide, or that you're basically that the value it's just certainly it's not there. Okay, so neither of these reasons, this is not what you should supply to the appraiser. The listing comparable properties, on the other hand, should ideally be higher in the price than the actual sale price of the subject property. This will indicate that the subject property is truly worth the value that is currently selling for. In other words, the list price should ideally be a small percentage higher than the actual sale price of the subject property. Once again, most people have negotiation room, in an asking price, and therefore, for example, if all of your comparable listings were under the actual sale price of your particular property, that would not be good for the appraisal and the appraiser in trying to prove the value. I understand in the real world that all of these perfect comparables do not always exist, but this is ideally what you're trying to find and deliver to the appraiser upon their arrival for the appraisal. Other items to give the appraiser. Every appraisal also requires a floor plan of the property. If you have one that was a part of the listing package, you should supply it. Okay? The appraiser always has to draw a floor plan of the property. If it's a 1-story ranch, they have to draw that. If it's a finished basement, they have to draw that as well. If same thing on a 2-story, you need all 2 stories. If it's 3-story, same thing. You need all the levels, as well as a finished basement. We do not need, as an appraiser, to draw an unfinished basement. Every appraisal also requires a legal description, even a condominium. If you have this available, you should supply it. Okay, you should try very hard to have that. That is something you should get from the seller, when you have the listing. In addition, every appraisal desires a plat of survey. If you have gathered this from the homeowner, if you have this document, the appraiser will love you for it, mainly for single-family residents. This is because now he or she has the proper dimensions to the house. In a single-family residence, the dimensions and square footage is calculated by exterior dimensions. In a condominium, the dimensions are figured from wall to wall, interior. So, other items to give to the appraiser continued. All the items should be clear copies of each of the listings, comparable sales, floor plan, legal description, and plan of survey. If you have the time and the experience, you can put adjustments on the comparable properties to indicate the pluses and the minuses and indicate the adjusted market value of these properties as compared to the subject property. I would not, do that unless you feel very comfortable that you know your marketplace inside and out and can really put these pluses and minuses and make sense and come to the value as to why yours has a fireplace, the other one didn't, and what is that worth within the marketplace. If you are an expert within your marketplace, by all means, go ahead and do that and put those pluses and minuses in. What to say to the appraiser at the appointment? Simply give the appraiser your packet of goodies, if you will, that you have prepared for them, and let the appraiser walk the property on their own. You don't need to shadow them and be around with them. If there are some significant features that are not mentioned in the listing, or you believe simply need to be emphasized, indicate these features to the appraiser at this juncture. You could have this written out if you like. These are features that I would like to just make sure that of these. A new roof, a new furnace, things like that. But most of this stuff should have been in your listing sheet in the first place if you've done a good listing sheet, with years that they were done. But there's nothing wrong with emphasizing all these points, to the appraiser to make sure that he or she understands that this is what has been done to the home, to make it better, than the other homes, in the area or whatever. What to say to the appraiser at the appointment continued. Then please ask the appraiser to address any questions that they may have to you at this time. So when he's completed his walkthrough, he or she just say, hey, is there anything that you have, to ask me in regards to the home, or any of the comps? And so this is the time to, he or she is giving you time, to talk, about it. So when the appraiser is actually finished with the inspection, make sure that they have your contact information just in case anything comes up that you can help them with. Make that clear. Please get in contact with me if you're having any trouble, coming to value or anything like that. I would appreciate a phone call, and maybe I can help you. So that is important, to talk about. After the appraisal appointment, make sure that you contact the lending institution, i.e. loan officer, 7 days from the inspection date to ensure that your sale price actually came in as the appraised market value of your property that you're trying to close on. Okay, this is very important. It's crucial. Do not let time elapse without checking on the appraised value of the property. The last issue on whether or not your property closes typically is the appraisal value. So it's ultra important to ensure that everything is okay with the market value. Okay, so it is highly important that you do this. Typically the last step in the process before you're going to close, and that is the actual appraisal value. So find out what it is. The loan officer will be glad to share that with you. And once again, wait the 7 days. If the appraisal value does not match the sale price, if the appraised market value comes in over the sale price, all is good for your deal. There are no issues. Loan to value issues are not going to come into play here. But if the appraised market value comes in lower than the sale price, all is not good for your deal. It is now likely that the loan to value ratio will be affected and is now an underwriting issue. If the people involved, the buyers were putting down, 25% or more, there is likely not going to be an issue. But if they have put down 20% or less, there is a high probability that now you're going to have an issue with this particular loan because the value isn't meeting the sale price. So if the appraisal value is lower than the sale price, the probable first phone call should be to the client and to let them know of this issue. There are 3 options from here. You can utilize the appraised value as the new sale price and proceed to closing. Okay, typically not a great first choice because obviously it's much less or lesser than, and everybody's gonna have to acquiesce and come to the new value and figure things out. Secondly, you can negotiate from the difference of the appraised value to the sale price and try to come to a resolve in this manner, oftentimes splitting the difference. Let's say there's a $10,000 difference, it's a $200,000 price. The property came in at $190,000. You guys now agree to go to $195,000. This would typically mean that the buyer now has to bring in an extra $5,000 to the closing to make it happen. So, not a great solution, but one that is fairly common when these type of issues happen. The other is to fight the appraised value with additional data supplied by the brokers involved in the deal. I can certainly help you with this. You have to literally fight the appraisal with different comparables. You get a look at the appraisal and you kind of fight it in that manner. It's something a little bit more complex, and once again, I can help you. Overview of this session. Always meet with the appraiser as the listing agent. Bring at least 3, preferably 5 comparable sale properties to the appraisal inspection. Bring at least 2, preferably 3 listing properties to the appraisal inspection. Bring a copy of a floor plan of the subject property if you have one. Bring a copy of the legal description of the subject property if you have one. Bring a copy of the plat survey of the subject property if you have one. Mark up the comparable sheets with adjustments if you have the ability, the expertise to do so. Continuing on this overview, allow the appraiser to roam the subject property unencumbered by you tagging along. Point out any of the issues that you feel need to be addressed concerning the subject property or the comparables very succinctly. Indicate to the appraiser a manner in which to contact you if there are any issues that should arise after the appraisal inspection. And then contact the lending institution loan officer 7 days after the inspection to determine if the appraised value came out to at least the sale price of the subject